coming. We have had a really, really full day. We read all of Sula. It was really, truly amazing. Yes. People came and went, and we read it. We were done by three or so. We started at 9:30. We had no idea how long it would take us. But I love that novel for many reasons, but because it's terse and economical is one of those reasons. So I'm Deborah McDowell, and I am thrilled to have you here and the rest of my colleagues. I don't know if people got programs. Did you? Okay, we'll pass them out. We have a quirky practice here at the Woodson Institute. We don't make formal introductions typically for a panel. But we put biographical information about people in the program, and the purpose for that is to allow you time to ask questions.
Absolutely.
Okay? All right. So, there are moments in our lives when books find us, or we find books. And it's been so long since Sula was a fixture in my life, my scholarship and my teaching, that it seems that it was always there. It wasn't, of course. I was at the start of my doctoral program at a Big Ten Midwestern University when a friend gave the book to me, I think. Somehow it got into my hands. And it was a kind of lifeline for me. I know it can seem to some rather sentimental to talk about books as lifelines, but it really was. It served that purpose for me as I attempted to navigate the treacherous minefield of academia. And it wasn't that there was anything in the book that referenced academia, but it's somehow this book I encountered at a critical time in my own personal and intellectual development, and it was critical. Writings by African American women, no matter the field, did not appear on any course syllabus of mine or on any prelim list, although these writers had begun to take the publishing world by storm. Ntozake Shange, Michelle Wallace, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Toni K. Bambara, and so many, many others had demanded through the force of their work that the world take notice, even if such notice was often grudging. Indeed, their work was roundly condemned in many quarters, notably among Black men with public platforms as journalists and reviewers who accused these writers, most especially, of caricaturing Black men as rapists, murderers, irresponsible fathers, domestic abusers, and general ne'er-do-wells. We who had found a lifeline in this work, then and now, knew firsthand the truth of their telling. James, was I supposed to have this? Okay. I don't mind. You know I don't know how anything works. It's on? Okay, good. All right. You had told me to use it, and then I forgot, and I saw it there. I'm almost done, though. I'm very brief here. Although I have read every novel Toni Morrison wrote, Sula has retained pride of place as the book of my mind. Those of you familiar with Morrison's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, Beloved, will recognize that phrasing, of my mind, as Paul D's description of his relationship with the novel's character, Setha. I quote Paul D, "She is a friend of my mind. She gather me, man. The pieces I am, she gather them and give them back to me in the right order. It's good, you know, when you got a woman who is a friend of your mind." When I say that Sula has been a friend of my mind for the past 40 plus years, I mean to say that it has functioned analogously as Setha for Paul D, to gather me, if not reorder the pieces that I am, to help me recognize those pieces in the pages of her work. But more as a friend of my mind, Sula, like so much of Morrison's work, has been a book to think with, to quarrel with, to mull over and meditate on. A book posing the ancient, imponderable questions: who and what is good? Who and what is evil? What is the nature of friendship? What transgressions does friendship permit? What is right? What is wrong? Whether for individuals, for communities, or for nations. But while posing these ancient questions, Morrison is frequently content to leave them simply suspended in inquiry and novelistic exploration. I came of intellectual age with Sula, The Bluest Eye, Meridian, and so many other works I encountered in my years of graduate study. And these works, no matter their setting, seem synced to the pressing issues of my time, of our time. As I have traveled with Toni Morrison through her enormous corpus, reading book after book that she has published, these works too seem synced to the pressing issues of our time. With a source of self-regard, her last book, a collection of her speeches, essays, and meditations, which came out earlier this year, I found myself, when reading it, caught up in the many questions she is also posing there, particularly such as what is the nature of foreignness? What is the matter with foreignness? What does it mean to be exiled in the place to which one supposedly belongs? What do we mean when we say home? Who is the foreigner? Am I the foreigner in my own home? Who or what is an American? While leaving these questions also suspended in inquiry in places in the text, which is one of Morrison's trademarks as a writer, as I've suggested, there are those times when what she writes leaves us not with questions, but declarations, along with moral injunctions. Let me leave you with but one before turning things over to our esteemed panel. When the unhoused remain suspect aliens, when the frightened and destitute huddle in beleaguered, garbage-strewn tent cities on land not their own, when identity becomes the very essence of the self, then recurring strategies of political construction are demanded. When incompetence and irrationality run roughshod over decency and continue to endanger lesser lives, we can anticipate a steep rise in the cost of caring, a cost to be borne if we value civilization, a cost to be borne if we value civilization. The ethics of affluence insist upon civic obligations, and when we assume that obligation, we reveal not our solitary goodwill, but our dependence on others. Thank you.
My dearest beloved, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming. I want to share with you a word. I'm not good at these things. I can talk loud. Can you hear me?
Eleanor, we need you recorded, honey.
I see. I want to share with you a note about our author that I read at the family memorial service for her in Pierpont, New York, on August 23rd. Dear family, dear magical all, our Chloe Toni was always out, otherworldly out, spatially exalted, in touch with another ecosystem, an ever-fertile place beckoned for ever-greening, continually achieving life, a provenance of wonder. She was outrageous, outlandish, outstanding, out of body into mind, always outthinking me. We talked about everything in the world except the simple and sane and safely dull. When she asked me what the world's best idea was, I answered with gleeful confidence, the Taj Mahal. She squashed me with a scalding, that's a building, not an idea. What is it then, Miss Smart something, I replied. She answered, the sewing machine. I could have answered, that's a thing, but anybody could see, could feel that she was just flat out right. So, what is the worst idea, she asked. And my southern self instantly replied, the Ku Klux Klan. Those are brutish idiots, she cried, not an idea. So what then, I wearily questioned. She smiled. The flush toilet. Those were our school mom conversations, shared in the third floor cubbyhole of an office on the penthouse floor of Founders Library at Howard University, where pigeons fed from the gutters of our wide windows. It was there that we wondered what a miscellaneous person was. On one of her visits, my mother had said to us, you are not miscellaneous persons. We had replied reverently, yes, ma'am. As soon as her back was turned, we had asked together, what in the world is a miscellaneous person? We howled. She said, where do they get all of that stuff? We knew. We reviewed such things in our office. We were girls together, and we did girl things. We loved the same stockings that a company called I Magnin made. The name of the stocking was No Color. It suited our legs and didn't show runs. We were poor and frugal. We earned $3,000 per year for grading 10,000 freshman compositions per week. But we loved the authors. Yet, we allowed ourselves treats. A Brandy Alexander every other Friday at the Blue Something Bar and Grill, a few steps from the stocking shop on F Street Northwest in Washington, D.C. When Lois and Wayne, the master hunter, would visit and bring pheasant, she and Lois would cook pheasant and make hot bread, and I made candied yams. The entire Longfellow Arms apartment building where she lived on the first floor and I on the second would smell like Christmas morning. And every time the movie changed at the Biograph, which is no more, where we saw Alexander Nevsky and Viva Zapata and all the Renoirs and Fellinis and Ingmar Bergmans, we were there. We ate tons of ice cream and loved a pot of neck bones. We repeatedly lost our minds over events, places, personalities. Like when Dino, now the illustrious Ford, her son, was 3 days old, I rushed in to Google gurgle him, and she said, "Stop! Wash your hands." I thought she'd turned into some kind of a nut. We never lost the joy of girl craziness. That is why we went dappled down berserk, gut-wrenching stupid, duck-dying mad, moonstruck, head over heels, silly, cockeyed crazy, helplessly insane over Barack Hussein Obama. My wish for the world is that it grow up with a friend who is the teeth and bone and gut and sinew and hair and tongue and grist and giblet called intelligence. Gordon Parks called it a learning tree. For me, it was Toni. After I had left the daily gaze of my prescient mother, I met Toni. She is not a gift to my life. She is a necessity. There is no loss in dying, said the Baltimore artist who has created a mural in her honor. He is right. We'd figured that out. She is now doing the work that needs to be done on the other side, the artist said. He's right. I get that. I dig it. Hasn't she shown us the most resplendent image this side of glory? A black woman singing us through eternity to eternal return? But more immediately, she is forever a nation's, a world's most beautiful, recent source of self-regard. Now, shall I continue?
Yeah, you do what you want to do, Eleanor.
I won't be long. A lifetime's project can be salvational. Mine is. Ever since my ear began to hunger for a certain sound, ever since speech, as in Sunday morning sermons or school oratoricals on occasions where the 4th of July masterpiece of Mr. Douglas was sure to be recited, ever since I spied Zora Neale Hurston's utterance, my soul stands up on tiptoe. Ever since I first heard James Baldwin speaking, ever since Gwendolyn Brooks gave me the word sovereignty in the context where she gave it, before Paul Marshall named the kitchen poets, and especially since the avalanche launched by Mumbo Jumbo, Kuntu, and Beloved, I have been thunderstruck by a language that is so hip, as Nikki Giovanni says it, so hip that even its errors are correct. I have praised its amazing effects in every essay that I have ever written, but only recently have I discovered a definite description of its properties. That is because I reread Sula and decoded Sula as a self-examining text about language. Of course, this language is the product of a place, be it ever so theoretical, whose amazements are as actual as pot liquor. I call the place a provenance of wonder. I have already described its protocols, old as these outlined by Vladimir Propp. I have theorized its discourse as complicated and fabulous as mumbo jumbo, and I have detailed some of its agencies and particulars. But though I've searched far and wide, I've found no details, no specifics more succinct than in these lines from Sula. So, what I am calling a wondrous language is expressed in this way, in that, language. Now, I'm supplying the language. She didn't say language. I'm making everything language. Language honed, not to let the eye see what the heart could not hold. That's page 171 in my text, the Borzoi text. Language that holds the most magnificent hatred they had ever known. That's page 173. Language that has no bottom and had no top, just circles in circles of sorrow. Page 175. Language determined not to let anything at all, not failed crops, not rednecks, not lost jobs, sick children, educated social workers, thieving insurance men, garlic-ridden hunkies, corrupt Catholics, racist Protestants, cowardly Jews, slave-holding Muslims, jack-legged nigger preachers, squeamish Chinamen, cholera, dropsy, or the Black Plague keep them from anything they had to do. Page 150. Language admitting a full recognition of the legitimacy of forces other than good ones, ceding the purpose of evil was to survive it, to survive floods, white people, tuberculosis, famine, and ignorance. Language that knew anger well, but not despair. This language is forged in those spaces suspended between the rich valleys of prosperity and the ethereal promise of the sky, famously called the bottom in Sula, often incorrectly called the ghetto, but by me called the provenance of wonder.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming out, and thank you for the invitation to be on this, I was told, informal panel. Everyone's doing really awesome, though. One of the things that I'd like to talk about today is the ways in which Morrison instructs us, and something that I have increasingly and repeatedly been learning, is that the liberation of black women is a priority of black women alone. The liberation of black women is a priority for black women alone. There might be allies that show up in a variety of ways, but I've had too many conversations with people, male colleagues, male brothers, in a way, to be persuaded of anything else. And Sula is a manual for that commemoration of sisterhood, particularly through the lens of a counter-patriarchal reading and the beautiful power of the phrase that Nell utters in this grief, "We was girls together." And what does that mean to be a burgeoning girl together? And to have that as a primary relationship, even as patriarchy, be it appear structurally or within one's own family, through one's grandmother, for example, instruct you that you cannot be the center of your own story. If you are a black woman, you need to be somebody's mama, you need to be somebody's daughter, you need to show your worth in ways that are about reproduction. And so what I wanted to talk just a tiny bit about is the ways in which we get to see Morrison unfold a continuation of what Phoebe says to Janie in Their Eyes Were Watching God, when Janie comes back into town and Phoebe says to her, "You look like you, your own daughter." And what does it mean to be your own daughter? And I know I have students that kind of puzzle over this, but Sula says it straight up. So when Ava says to her, hey, look, you need to stop being you and stop being so free and stop being so poised and stop being so, I don't give a fuck about anything or anyone else. You need some babies, right? Using babies as a disciplinary tool to control her, to break her, actually, in complete acknowledgement that that's what children do, is that children are intended, at least in Ava's imagination, to control and break willful women. And she absolutely and vehemently rejects this when she says, I don't want any babies. I want to make myself. I want to make myself. And there's something about that rugged autonomy and independence that if this was a male character would be celebrated and applauded. But Morrison recognizes the skepticism with which Sula would be treated when we have that beautiful line that says she was like an artist, you know, without a form. And like anyone without a form, she became dangerous. And this is the kind of child who one might imagine when she overhears her mother say, I don't like her very much, that helped to turn the corner for her as a character. All that Hannah was doing, though, was being honest about what children can do to people, right? And so this notion of wanting to make oneself, of a black woman saying in Morrison's novel so early in the 1970s, I want to make myself, I am my own project, I'm my own best thing, I think is a revolutionary act and is useful to think of in that way. And so for me, I think about Morrison and her work as one of an author, an artist, an archivist, and an architect. And particularly architect is something I get hung up on a lot when you think about Pierre Nora's A Lieu de Mémoire, right? This place or site of memory. That what she has created, particularly with Beloved, which is an example that she herself refers to when she says that, you know, because when she was writing the book, there was no African American History Museum as we have now in DC. There was no places where people are talking about the presences or absences of slaves. There was no bench by the road. And so because that did not exist, the book had to. And the idea of crafting a book as a site, as a place where we can sit and think and grieve and shine and revel and laugh, because a lot of it is so funny. There's a lot of really funny parts. And so this just helps me to think that even when I'm not teaching Morrison, and we talked about this a lot today, my class is here, shout out, what, look, there's like a whole little row of them right back there. We talked about this in the context of Edward P. Jones and The Known World, which is a fantastic must-read book by everybody. And isn't it fantastic? And like, as like a follow-up to Beloved, and looking at that book as an archive in the same way that Beloved is an archive. And for me, rereading Sula as an adult that I am now, entering my 5th decade, means so much more to me than it did when I was reading it in my 20s, right? It's a book you grow into. It is a book that delivers something different to you as you, and it's like waiting for you to catch up, right? Those people who were all put out that that Sula and whatever her husband's name was had sex, Jude had sex, are people who are not similarly put out maybe 30 years later and can recognize that loss differently. Some might remain put out. So for me, even when I'm not teaching Morrison, I'm always teaching Morrison, and this is because her work will continue to teach us all, and now we have the chance to relish the ways in which she is now the ancestor as foundation. Thank you.
She was simply our greatest writer. She was the greatest verbal transfigurer of this place, America, in our time. Chloe, Anthony, Toni, Wofford, Morrison wielded words with grace, lyricism, fearlessness, power, supreme confidence in her own vision, and with a sublimely educated ear for sound, for prose rhythm, for the arc and turn and settle of a line. Morrison's power was all the greater for being rooted in humility before the treasure she knew she possessed, the language and world-building ways of African American people, which she conjured and transmuted through her voice into a singular art. She may sound a little like others, but no one sounds like her. That signature Morrison tone, what is it? Equal parts slyness and wisdom, stylishness and holy reverberation. In healthy doses, paradoxical, even oxymoronic, as in the bottom up on top of the hill. Still, it was lovely up in the bottom, she says. Or the intoxicating perfume that wafts from dying roses. Or the story of why they call it not Dr. Street. Morrison's voice is droll and ingenious when it riffs on black cultural conceiving in the face of ruin. There is a difference between being put out and being put outdoors. If you are put out, you go somewhere else. If you are outdoors, there is no place to go. Outdoors was the end of something, an irrevocable physical fact, defining and complementing our metaphysical condition. Her voice brims with gorgeous affection in a controlled delivery when she summons her invented human beings. Not even trying, he had become the kind of man who could walk into a house and make the women cry. Her voice is archly scathing when cataloging the history of white racist hate. White people believe that under every dark skin was a jungle, swift, unnavigable waters, swinging, screaming baboons. But it was the jungle white folks planted in them, and it grew, it spread, until it invaded the one who had made it, touched them, every one, made them bloody, silly, worse than they had ever wanted to be. And her voice utters thunder when she does sorrow's work of rememory, invoking those in African American history who were subjected to the worst. He kept on through the voices. Although he couldn't cipher but one word, he believed he knew who spoke them. The people of the broken necks, of fire-cooked blood, and black girls who had lost their ribbons. What a roaring. Finally, in moments, her voice could be the barest elemental call of self, love, longing. You your best thing, Setha, you are. Me? Me? Oh, Lord, Sula, girl, 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 girl. If I were able, I'd say it, say, make me, remake me. You are free to do it, and I am free to let you, because look, look, look where your hands are now. A couple days after her death, the Toni Morrison Society wrote to everyone on their email list, sending condolences, as they quite distinctively put it, on the physical death of Toni Morrison. Though physically gone, this email said, she has left us her work and her enormous spirit. I would add, and her voice. I know I'm far from alone in feeling grateful that despite the nastiness of the world and the difficult circumstances under which she worked, Toni Morrison found in herself the fortitude to live a lifetime to transmit in light, to transfigure in language the lives of her people. Though physically gone now, she leaves her readers still within a capacious theater. Architect, he said. A capacious theater, an earthy, lofty, richly peopled American theater, framed and raised and inspirited by that shrewd and sonorous, oracular, reverberant, unforgettable storytelling voice. And now I would like to play the voice of Toni Morrison for you. So, gods of technology are with us.
Everywhere.
The final word. It was a loneliness
slowly on. This motion, unlike the ship's, smooth and contains the rocker. It's an inside kind, wrapped tight like skin. Then there's a loneliness that roams, rocking. It's alive on its own, a dry, spreading thing that makes the sound of what seem to come from a far off place. Everybody knew what she was called, but nobody gave it anything. This lost because no one was looking for her. And we looked at her. How can they call her if they don't know her name? Although she has claimed, she is not claimed. In the place where the long grass opens, the girl who waited to be loved and cries she erupts into her separate parts to make it easy for the children to swallow her all away. These are stories about her. They forgot her like a bad dream after they made up their tales and shaped and decorated them. Those that saw her that day on the porch quickly and deliberately forgot her. It took longer for those who had spoken to her, lived with her, fallen in love with her, to forget. And they realized they couldn't remember or repeat the same thing. And began to believe that other than what they themselves defended, she hadn't said anything at all. So in the end, they forgot her too. Remembering seeing her why. They never knew where or why she crouched, or whose was the other face she needed like that. But the memory of the smile under her chin might have been, and was not, a latch. And like her attached, its apple green bloomed to the sun. What made her think her finger, her open lock, the name of the top? His last story to pass on, so they forgot it, like an unpleasant dream during a troubling sleep. A page in the hour, the rustle of a skirt hushes when they wake, and the knuckles brushing a cheek in sleep seem to belong to the sleeper. Sometimes the photograph of a close friend or relative looked at too long, shifts, and something more familiar than the dear face itself moves there. They can touch it if they like, but don't, because they know things will never be the same. This is not going to pass on. Down by the stream in back of 124, the footprints come and go, come and go. They are so familiar. Should a child, and it does, place his feet in them, they'll fit. Take them out. They will disappear again as though no one ever walked there. By and by, all trace is gone. And what is forgotten is not only the footprints, but the water too, and what it is down there. The rest is weather, not the breath of the disremembered and unaccounted for, but when in the eve, or spring night, gone to the just weather, certainly no cloud or
Part of me that says we should just sit with that. Serve for a minute.
time that remains, we will take your questions.
I've never read anything by Toni Morrison.
What a treat you have ahead of you.
Where should I start?
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
I'm interested. I'm fascinated.
Sheesh.
You can start at the beginning
That's
with
what
the
I would
bluest
say.
sky.
Start at the beginning.
Start
Go
all the way
yeah.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
Watch that.
Yeah, it's a
And
great
then
arc.
move to, yeah, in fact, I think the
Or
first
you can
three.
start at the beginning for her and read Beloved first, and then go back.
Start at Beloved and read.
Because of history? Why?
Yeah.
Because it's the one that goes deepest into history.
The essays are also so
Can I
good.
just, of mine, soon not to be graduate student, Tom Addington, Howard, and his brother Quentin.
Hello.
Thank
Oh, you
for
came
coming.
down here. Oh, super.
Lovely.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, yeah. I think you could, okay, it's another. You go back, you read the book, and then you read school, and you read the book, you will have a blessing.
Come to my class to read Beloved with us in a few weeks.
Oh, wow.
This
That's
is
a nice treat.
It's good
Maybe
to read.
I'll
It's good to
come.
read that
I'm
book.
just
with
saying, like,
everybody. It's good
It
to
really
read that
is
with
good to
others.
read it.
Actually, it's difficult and it's
yes,
wonderful,
I think it's good to read it with other people. If it's your first time through, I think that's a good idea. If it's your first introduction to Morrison, it's a great option.
We think it's the American epic.
Yeah. Not, it is.
Yeah.
There's this critic who said about it, and I think actually it's true of her work as a whole. Now that she's written it, I can't imagine American literature without it,
Right.
which is just amazing because it's a very strange book, you know, to imagine, but it made itself indispensable. It's as if there was a space and it came to fill her work as a whole.
I just wanted to add just something about voice and about being able to like have these modern technologies that have preserved the actual sound of her voice. And I wanted to add, there's a podcast that I really love called Marsha's Plate. It's a black trans woman. It's a black trans podcast, and it has 2 trans women and 1 trans man on it. And Diamond Styles, who's the trans woman on the podcast, was saying she did a special episode on Toni Morrison's passing. And toward the end of it, she talked about basically how Toni Morrison saved her life. That she was a queer, at the time, boy, and she had been like kicked out. Her family was in disarray. She was bitterly lonely growing up in Texas that was very conservative. And a teacher, she might have been 12, a teacher gave her a copy of The Bluest Eye. And through reading The Bluest Eye, and I think she says, I'm saying she because she's she, now she says that reading Sula and The Bluest Eye helped her to have more tolerance for her mother, who was an addict and had been estranged. And all of this just gave her a place. And she also says that for years, she would listen to Toni Morrison's speeches on YouTube. And she would put them into a loop in GarageBand, and she would play them to go to sleep at night. So the sound of Toni Morrison's voice for this black trans woman who does really amazing work and great trans advocacy. And I really, like I said, Marsha's Plate is the name of the podcast. I love it so much. I'm a patron. I give money to it every month. I mean, and she talked about like Morrison just saved her life. Just the sound. This is someone who didn't study Morrison in college. She didn't, you know, but this was this kind of salvific, the idea of having literature be a place. I'm totally serious about that. And we can see her finding harbor in that and breaking through the boundaries of isolation and finding this place to be beloved, to be heard, to be cherished. And Morrison's voice being a setting for that. And when she talked about this on her podcast maybe like 3 weeks ago, and it was incredibly moving. So I check out that episode of Marsha's Plate. It has like a tribute to Toni Morrison, and you can find that podcast or whatever.
Anybody else, or comments even, questions or comments? Yes, yes.
think the way that the novel concentrates on female friendship and prioritizes that is revolutionary, because women, the way that at least the world that Morrison is constructing in this book, and I'd love to hear the other panelists and other people chime in. It seems that she is making this radical gesture to have two black women be friends from girlhood, to come through together, to have survived and committed terrible acts, like with Chicken Little, you know, and the idea, the way that Nell uses that moment to say that I am the good friend and you are the bad friend. And like what you were talking about, what kind of shelter can be found in friendship, what kind of transgressions. And so it seems to me that it becomes an interesting story about that, about how black women can choose each other, even though there's almost every reason not to, or that we are encouraged not to. I mean, I feel like we often get subtle messages that black women's loyalties should be to everybody but ourselves, right? And I think this is just a larger function of patriarchy in general, but I think it shows up in really punitive and damaging ways for black women when we don't feel we have the, I don't know, but it be the right or the choice to choose each other. And so, yeah, and I don't think we see that for other folks. Other folks, like with the way that Sula talks about black men, like everybody loves y'all, you know?
And if everybody doesn't love you, you love yourself.
You love yourself. It is. Y'all can't go a day without being without each other. And so for me, it becomes a model because it prioritizes female friendship. It normalizes that. It also allows two women who are pretty aggressively individual. So like when Nell says, I'm me, I'm not Nell, I'm not their daughter, I'm me. You know, I don't know how she doesn't seem to like fully execute that until much later, but she articulates this choice that I want to choose myself in the same way that Sula wants to choose herself. And so I think for me, that's what I was thinking when I was talking about this as a model for a strategy for black women's liberation through the boundaries or through the imaginations of black women prioritizing and choosing each other. Not to the exclusion or the dismissal, but even this caveat makes me feel a little shitty, right? Because why do I have to make such a caveat? Why can't I just say, this is about black women, choosing black women, and if you don't like it, that's too damn bad, go do something else with your time.
I don't have a quota. Someone else may have a quota. Go ahead, Ellen.
This again?
I know. They want to record you.
Little me.
Yes, of course.
Stop it, Ellen.
You know, and in that sense, in that very important sense, that very fundamental sense, that very sense, you know, but also in a cosmic sense. Mm-hmm. It is her resistance toward bad ideas. Mm-hmm. What we have called tradition, unexamined for so long. We do it that way and think that way because that's the way to do. This is her explosion of that attitude. This is her insistence that we examine those ideas that work to our ruin. You know, people still endorse things that are against their self-interest. You know, the whole political spectrum today seems to suggest that. We haven't gotten out of that attitude. No, that's not the way it should be. But if you read The Bluest Eye, that is a platform of bad ideas. A platform of bad ideas. This little girl is driven crazy because of the awful attitudes toward color, toward gender, toward sex, toward everything you can imagine. And Sula is an explosion of it.
Yeah,
I think about it in that way.
Yeah, I think I could add to that a little bit on the idea question, because I always joked with Toni Morrison and wrote here and there about the fact that she really is a philosophical novelist. She's a philosopher. I would joke and say, you know, you're a philosopher and you ply your trade through fiction. But she is absolutely giving us, in book after book after book, these philosophical questions, these philosophical conundra that have really preoccupied people through the ages. In The Bluest Eye, for example, she talks about the ideas of beauty and romantic love being two of the most destructive ideas that anybody has had to live with, that people are destroyed in defense of, in the name of these two ideas. So you're absolutely right that she is from work to work trying to find ways of cutting through all of these notions that we inherit. And, you know, in terms of Sula, the one in particular that tells women from the time they have language, it would seem to me, that the end and aim of your existence should be your connection to a male, preferably in marriage and with children, and that if you do not succeed, because it's an expectation of an achievement, that should be your achievement, all right? Your highest achievement in life is to marry and reproduce. And so Sula is really cutting through at fundamental levels, that and other, many other ideas. So I agree with you that she is challenging many of our inherited ideas and notions, particularly those that are most destructive to individual formation and human community.
I was thinking about this as like thinking of, I often teach A Mercy. That's one of my favorite recent ones. And her project of uncoupling slavery from race. And I think that that's something that gets laid out so beautifully in that novel. And it really is, just to, you know, elaborate on what you were saying about her work as a philosopher, as that novel is like an experiment on what it means to be America before there was that formation of an America.
Any other questions? Some of you have been with us since 9:30 this morning. And it was just really so magical. We discovered that after the live streaming, we would have to take it down because of issues of copyright. But yes, right. But it was truly an amazing experience. People turned out to read sections of the novel. It was absolutely beautiful. And so for anybody who is rested and who says, well, I thought this was from 5 to 6, that isn't meaning we're expelling you, but for anybody who feels that they've given as much time as they intend today to Sula, we can be done and we can stay. It is one thing that I can say here, I'm going to try to say it. Toni Morrison was a friend of mine. So she's a world-renowned writer, but also someone with whom I traveled, talked on the phone, knew for over 30 years. And not as long as Eleanor. Not as long as Eleanor knew her. No, Eleanor, you're not the oldest person on the planet. But what I can say, and I'm sure Eleanor can share it with me, that this woman has left behind this body of work that will outlive us all right?
And that at moments like this, our impulse is to idealize. But we also knew a person who could be tremendously cantankerous.
Absolutely.
Fussy,
Yeah.
demanding,
Impossible.
self-regarding. So I say all of that to say, this is not about idealizing the dead. This was a human being, this was a person. And one of my very, very funniest stories is being with her in Paris at the launching of the French translation of A Mercy. And we're in this huge bookstore. Sorry for telling this again, Eleanor, because we had a gathering last Sunday in Memorial, and we were all telling stories, and this is the story I told. So at a moment, she turns to me in this crowded Parisian bookstore to say, "Where's your lipstick?" I need some lipstick. So I reach in my bag. I give Toni Morrison my lipstick. That's hot. But then the next morning, we were traveling on a train to Strasbourg. She was going to receive an award. And somehow she got it into her head the night before that we should travel with a box of fried chicken. Now, where Janice Mays, a colleague of ours from Syracuse, found this fried chicken, I will never know. But imagine Toni Morrison, her son, her assistant, and 2 other people on a train with a box of fried chicken. That is one of my fondest memories of many, many other moments of really, as she put it in the dedication to Sula, of sheer good fortune. It is our sheer good fortune to still have available to us this body of work of someone who is truly, truly a national treasure. All right, thank you.